A todos ustedes. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos en esta inauguración tan sumamente importante para esta universidad y para la institución dentro de la cual se encuentra. Es un gusto el haber podido estar aquí o el compartir la siguiente hora y media, aprendiendo de las mejores prácticas educativas en el ámbito, en el caso de hoy, muy probablemente más en el campo de la universidad que en el campo escolar, pero en cualquier caso, gracias y de la mano de Magisterio, hoy inauguramos lo que se va a convertir en una serie de encuentros con esa realidad que tanto nos envuelve y nos inquieta y verdaderamente la pasión y la vocación donde se encuentra en cada uno de nosotros en el día a día, ¿no? Hoy, además, la ocasión es única, puesto que nos van a acompañar dos personas, un profesor, director de la Universidad de Birmingham y una experta y senior advisor en el British Council, para darnos unas pinceladas sobre las consecuencias a corto, medio y largo plazo que tiene lo que es la salida inminente del Reino Unido de la Unión Europea. Yo venía pensando, bueno, haciendo mejor los deberes, venía desde hace unos días pensando en qué cosas, me imagino que cubrirán nuestros ponentes, pero en qué cosas verdaderamente merece la pena tener en cuenta en términos de riesgos y de peligros que esto puede entrañar para el propio sistema universitario británico. Ellos son los expertos y en cualquier caso dirán si algunas de estas cuestiones tienen o no lógica, si son refutables o no, o si hay evidencia empírica para soportarlas. El primer riesgo, obviamente, podríamos decir que es la pérdida de músculo financiero de muchas universidades británicas, que representan una porción muy importante de los fondos en proyectos de investigación H2020 y que con la salida de la Unión Europea, pues obviamente parece algo complicado el que puedan seguir concursando sus grandes investigadores a esos proyectos muy cuantiosos, que en algunos casos proyectos individuales que se sostienen sobre la base de 2, 3, 4 millones de euros. Esa es una cuestión que dejo ahí para la reflexión. Luego hay todos los que nos preocupamos y nos apasiona el mundo, lo que es el talento, el capital humano, pues obviamente va a ser esto un elemento de disuasión para lo que es el desembarque de nuevos alumnos no europeos y europeos, es decir, no ciudadanos británicos en el Reino Unido para seguir sus estudios o para proseguir sus estudios y para enrolarse en lo que es a nivel de grado o de máster en cualquiera de las prestigiosas universidades británicas, y por ende será más fácil o más complicado el reclutar talento claustro, es decir, profesores internacionales para el Reino Unido. Hay un tercer aspecto que puede ser el surgimiento de una competencia en idioma inglés, que ya existe desde hace una década larga en muchos países escandinavos, en muchos países del norte de Europa, donde ya han acogido el inglés como lingua franca. Entonces, podría esto suponer el surgimiento de una serie de jugadores que apostaran aún más por reclutar a alumnos de otros países de la Unión Europea, llevándolos hacia sí sin necesidad de dominar su lengua materna. Lengua materna, digamos, el alemán o el holandés o el francés, es decir, utilizando el inglés como elemento de captación y de atracción. Esos son algunos de los riesgos, pero obviamente estamos ante uno de los mejores sistemas universitarios que hay en el mundo, por no decir el mejor sistema universitario. Es decir, es un sistema, como muchos de ustedes conocen, autónomo, dinámico, hipercompetitivo y basado sobre la excelencia. Y esto no solo y exclusivamente a las universidades que forman parte de ese grupo de élite, lo que podríamos llamar la Ivy League, que es el Russell Group, sino muchas otras universidades que con iniciativas tan valientes e iniciativas tan interesantes como las del Ministerio de Educación y Ciencia, que en los últimos años ha impulsado ese Teaching Excellence Framework. Es una especie de plataforma de universidades por la docencia, por la innovación metodológica, por el impacto laboral y el impacto en el capital de sus alumnos, se están saliendo de alguna forma a analizar, a parametrizar la excelencia educativa desde otro punto de vista. Eso verdaderamente es algo único, puesto que es dejar al lado la forma clásica de contemplar la investigación académica y centrar todo el esfuerzo y toda la atención y toda la aportación probablemente de recursos públicos el día de mañana en lo que gira en torno a la experiencia del alumno. Es poner al alumno en el centro gravitatorio de lo que es el eje matricial de una universidad versus el contemplar la universidad como un mero proveedor de ciencia y de conocimiento. Estas son algunas de las cuestiones que yo personalmente quería compartir con ustedes, pero en cualquier caso nuestro experto de la casa es el profesor Francisco López Rupérez, quien muy recientemente se ha incorporado con nosotros después de un periodo largo de tiempo dedicándose dentro del servicio público en distintas etapas a grandes instituciones como es el Ministerio de Educación, como es la Consejería de Educación, como es la OCDE, como es la UNESCO, como es me falta una, Francisco, corrígeme. El Consejo de Europa, exacto. Ha sido todo en todo ello y ahora viene con muchas ganas, mucha energía en esta, yo diría, primera recta, no recta final de su carrera profesional, primera recta y nueva etapa, a verdaderamente a embadurnarnos, a tamizarnos a nuestra universidad y a nuestra institución con esas reflexiones a partir de una cátedra de análisis de políticas educativas comparadas que nos ayudará, sin lugar a duda, a entender marcos regulatorios, entender mercados, entender iniciativas privadas e entender, obviamente, el policy making, las decisiones políticas y lo que es el marco político en lo referente tanto a la educación escolar como a la educación universitaria. No les voy a entretener más. Muchísimas gracias una vez más. Paso la palabra a Francisco López Rupérez. Muchas gracias.
Señor Rector, personalidades, señores ponentes del British Council, amigos y amigas, buenos días a todos. En primer lugar, quiero agradecer las cariñosas palabras formuladas por el rector en lo que concierne a mi persona y efectivamente abro una nueva etapa en mi vida profesional que espero se traduzca en algunas contribuciones significativas desde la sociedad civil o desde las organizaciones de la sociedad civil a la mejora de la calidad de la educación en nuestro país. En las últimas décadas, la problemática sobre la movilidad internacional de los estudiantes universitarios ha sido objeto y viene siendo objeto de atención por parte de organismos internacionales de carácter multilateral como la UNESCO o la OCDE, en donde se ha reflexionado profundamente sobre las exigencias de esa movilidad en términos de procedimientos de garantía de calidad para que la movilidad tenga asegurada un nivel suficiente de calidad institucional y, por tanto, no derive en fraudes en materia de servicios. Y también, por supuesto, ha sido un tema importante de atención por parte de investigadores y analistas internacionales. He de decirles que a finales de la década pasada se estimaban en 2.500.000 el número de estudiantes universitarios del mundo que habían decidido proseguir sus estudios fuera de su país, de los cuales 700.000 procedían del este asiático, es decir, un 28%. Estas cifras dan cuenta por sí solas de la envergadura del flujo internacional de alumnos universitarios, así como de los intereses, de los desafíos y de las oportunidades, tanto en el ámbito cultural como en el puramente económico, que se dan cita en torno a este fenómeno, al fenómeno de la movilidad internacional de los estudiantes universitarios. Estoy absolutamente convencido de que, sin perder de vista los argumentos de fondo, Caroline Chipperfield va a analizar en qué medida el Brexit puede afectar a la movilidad de los estudiantes europeos de educación superior. Paso ahora a hacer una pequeña semblanza del perfil biográfico de la ponente principal. Caroline Chipperfield es consejera senior de Política y Estrategia de Educación Superior para el British Council, con sede en Londres. Posee una formación científica de base, pues es graduada en Física con Matemáticas. Además, tiene un máster en Política Internacional y Diplomacia y centró su tesis de maestría en el análisis del papel del soft power en las universidades. Como ustedes probablemente sepan, el enfoque del llamado soft power en las relaciones internacionales es un modo de considerar la capacidad de los Estados y de sus organizaciones para incidir en las acciones e intereses de otros actores a través de medios culturales e ideológicos con la acción complementaria de los recursos diplomáticos. En la actualidad, es responsable de la respuesta del Consejo Británico en materia de educación superior en Europa y asesora a la organización con oficinas en todo el mundo sobre el trabajo político, incluyendo la supervisión de las delegaciones y las visitas ministeriales en relación con esta temática. Dispone de más de 10 años de experiencia en el asesoramiento a directivos universitarios y a organizaciones del sector, tanto en el Reino Unido como en Asia Oriental. En el momento presente prepara un doctorado en gestión de la educación superior en la Universidad de Bath del Reino Unido. Antes de su intervención y a modo preliminar, va a tomar también la palabra Alex de Ruyter, director del Centro para los Estudios del Brexit en la Universidad de Birmingham. And without further ado, I give you the floor.
Buenos dias. That's about the limit of my Spanish, I'm afraid. Gracias, hola. And café con leche, por favor. It's a real honour to be invited here today, courtesy of the British Council, so I want to thank them for extending the invitation. My name is Alex de Ruyter. I'm a professor at Birmingham City University and serve as director of its Centre for Brexit Studies. I'm originally Australian, but my surname, as you might see, is Dutch. So I feel European by about 3 generations removed. Now, that's actually a serious point, because in coming to Brexit, which I will do soon, it calls into question deeper issues of culture and identity, which of course were discussed over the last 2 days at a British Council event convened with Siena, also to look into these issues and how to maintain cultural links between Britain and the rest of the European Union. To repeat, I feel European by culture, and as we go forward and try and establish a new relationship between the United Kingdom and the EU, these questions will become very prominent. And I think one of the first things I would like to say before we talk about issues around student mobility is to quote our Prime Minister, Theresa May: Britain might be leaving the European Union, but it most definitely is not leaving Europe. I think that's a very important point. And I want to reassure you that there is a lot of goodwill and enthusiasm, particularly from UK universities, to keep these links alive. So I've been in the United Kingdom for 17 years. I became director of the newly formed Centre for Brexit Studies, which is the first centre of its type in the world, in February of this year. It was formed in November last year. It is an interdisciplinary platform combining academics from business, economics, law, and other social sciences. So we are genuinely interdisciplinary in looking at issues relating to Brexit. My own background, I'm an economist of sorts. my main interest is in employment and globalization issues, so that brings me to this conversation today. So my official title is Professor of Brexit Studies, which gives me a license, if you like, to talk about many things, which reflects my own jack-of-all-trades type personality. Now, in my career, I've been variously an Erasmus coordinator at the University of Birmingham for its French Erasmus program, so I have a long-held passion for these types of student links and really appreciate the value that they bring to the learning experience for students. I've been a director of undergraduate studies, an associate dean for learning and teaching, director of research at various institutions. So I have a fairly good management experience in higher education. And a theme all across has been the issue of globalisation. So I suppose I come here today, in a sense, trying to argue the case for the UK. And I want to say that despite the image of the Leave vote as being depicted as the emphatic will of the British people, actually the Leave vote was a majority of 2% of the people who actually voted. So in real terms, about 17 million people in the UK voted to leave the EU. 30% of the electorate did not vote. So the actual Leave vote is not actually a majority. It is a majority of a vote that took place on June the 23rd. So you should be reassured in thinking that the British people have not expressed an emphatic will to leave Europe. That brings into question to us what Europe is. I mean, Europe exists on multiple levels, and I'll come back to that later. So, touch briefly on student mobility, then to me the real issue around the impact of Brexit and what I think will happen going forward, and what I think should happen, particularly in reference to higher education. I'm an academic, I'm not a civil servant, so I can be controversial. So if you'll indulge me in that, I will appreciate it. Of course, when we talk about student mobility worldwide, we've seen a fourfold increase in the last 25 years. So 1.3 million in 1990, and certainly in the last 15 years or so, a doubling in terms of trends in student mobility. Now, this is mobility in its most general sense. That is, those who are undertaking education outside of their country of origin. And you see the sources there. Ultimately, this comes from an OECD report. Now, most of that recent rapid growth actually has been in emerging economies, namely China and India. So in 2015, for example, of all students studying abroad, China, India, and South Korea comprised over 25%. The other thing that we should note is the growth of intra-regional mobility. So historically, of course, countries like the United Kingdom and the United States have been the most popular destinations for outward-bound students, given, of course, the primacy of the English language as a lingua franca for business and academia. Now, it's an interesting question as the UK prepares to leave the EU, whether English will still be that lingua franca. I believe it will be. Just given the nature of the makeup of the EU, I don't see that changing. And that's an important point, which we'll come back to. But just as with globalization in the last 25 years, we have seen the spectacular growth of China, soon to displace the United States as the world's largest economy, we imagine, and of course impressive growth in India in the last 20 years, we have also seen worldwide a relative shift in university rankings as typically measured by those such as the Times Higher Education Rankings Index. China, particularly for the UK, still remains the single most important source of foreign students. Indeed, in some programs at Russell Group universities that I've taught in over the years, 90% of a master's intake will be ethnic Chinese. Now, you can raise questions about the vitality of that as a business model, because, of course, nothing stays constant, does it? I mean, Francis Fukuyama, somewhat prematurely proclaimed the end of history 25 years ago. No, as we've seen, the unexpected can continue to happen. And of course, as the current French presidential elections show us, the unexpected or the undesirable may yet happen. So China's impressive economic performance has been mirrored by the number of university graduates produced in China, some 3 million per annum, roughly, which, you know, don't even try and contemplate that as a statistic. But China's improved performance in the world economy is seeing it increasingly become a destination for foreign students. When I say foreign, I mean Western students as well. And leading Chinese institutions such as SIBS compete very effectively with Western institutions. So China has a target of over 500,000 foreign students by 2020, some 330,000 foreign students already in 2012, largely from the region, it might be noted there. So South Korean students studying in China, Indonesian students studying in China, for example. Japan, with its historic excess capacity in universities, has increasingly come to target foreign students as well. So a target of 300,000 inbound students by 2020. And of course, as we are well aware in the UK, Malaysia has posited itself somewhat effectively as a regional economic hub for students in Asia coming in to study, Asia and of course the Middle East and so on. So that shifting higher education landscape saw the Times rankings there in 2014-15 demonstrate 24 out of the top 200 universities in the world be located in Asia. So for Britain and the US, this shift means that, you know, the potential is there for our institutions to slip lower down in the rankings. So that's the sort of macro landscape for higher education, particularly UK higher education. And the impact of Brexit, of course, is not unimportant here. Particularly when we consider that destination countries have still largely been dominated by what we call their traditional players. So, in terms of a few years ago, the OECD reported the top 5 destination countries there is the United States, and then the UK, and then Australia, France and Germany. So of course for the UK, being host to 40% of European students graduating outside of their country of origin during 2012-13, anecdotal evidence at least suggests that with the tighter visa climate and the more hostile attitude in some quarters, there is at least some evidence to suggest that this is dropping. The United Kingdom, of course, a few years ago, decided to withdraw 24-month work study visas. And one of the immediate consequences of that was that the Indian market, which was reasonably buoyant or thriving, other countries like Germany did not do this. So I've taught in Germany, a lot of MBA students there, Indian. So the UK's position is slipping in that sense, and that's before we even begin to consider Brexit. One of the things the United Kingdom likes to do is to classify foreign inbound students as migrants, which I would say is highly misleading in the sense that the majority of these people are not looking for permanent settlement. So, for the UK then, Brexit, to put it very simply, and this is a very simple argument because we've said all along that what Brexit reflects is a very complex phenomenon, and despite the fact that it's been popularly painted as a referendum against EU migration, the actual causes of this are a lot more in depth, and I would suggest have been bubbling away in the UK economy over the last 30 years or so. So, for us as a group of researchers looking into Brexit, if anything, Brexit represents a kind of wake-up call to the United Kingdom government, and it clearly represents a wake-up call to the EU as well. Now that, paradoxically, might actually entail opportunities for the EU to renew its project. The EU has been, accused of having a democratic deficit, and indeed that was one of the arguments that came into the Brexit debate. But in looking at this vote, if one were to indulge in the risk of trying to predict the future, it may, French presidential election results notwithstanding, have a positive impact in terms of renewing the European project. So to reiterate, the June 23rd vote was interpreted by the government as a vote to leave the EU, but to reiterate, the United Kingdom government, certainly not a vote to leave Europe. We are culturally European, we are linguistically European, and despite the views of some British imperial fantasists, we actually have a shared history. You know, for 400 years, UK monarchs spoke French. Well, they were French. Plantagenets, Angevins, etc. So, in terms of student mobility, though, and trying to maintain schemes for freedom of movement, the UK government has expressly stated that it wishes to take control of its borders. I'm not 100% sure what that means, but in essence, it's been interpreted as freedom of movement, according to the UK, should come to an end in terms of entry to the UK. And this seems to be a bipartisan political view. The British Labour Party have also recently stated in trying to draft their election manifesto, because, as you'll be aware, we have another election in the United Kingdom now on June the 8th, ostensibly to clarify the government's negotiating stance or reinforce it if you're the government. In essence, the current negotiating stance, if there is no compromise from either party, would mean the UK exiting the single market and exiting the customs union. I don't see how that can be avoided given the current stance where the EU position is that freedom of movement is one of the 4 fundamental pillars, and the UK government and the UK official opposition party both stating that freedom of movement in its current guise must come to an end. So the only assumed stance we can interpret then on behalf of the UK negotiators is that the UK government's aim, assuming it is still Theresa May and her party after June the 8th, will be to try and maintain as preferential access to the single market and customs union as is possible. It has no other choice. I mean, the best I can see occurring for the UK in this context is some kind of sector-specific deals emerging in key sectors where the perceived fallout or damage to both parties would be too great to let some kind of deal slip through. But we are certainly under no illusions that for EU negotiators, the temptation to not give the UK a generous Brexit settlement is very real, because the last thing you would want as an EU negotiator, and as Tusk and that have been quite upfront about this, Emmanuel Macron, the favourite to win the presidential election in France, has described Brexit as a crime. The last thing they want is for the UK to appear to get a generous deal, because that might encourage other countries and populists like Le Pen to try and push for the same. So to me and my colleagues, we see the best scenario for the UK as sector-specific deals. As someone operating in higher education, I hope that will be the case for higher education. Because we like to argue that higher education, we used the term yesterday in the British Council conference, the French term, cultural exceptional. I don't think I've quite pronounced that correctly. But as a sector, we are different. We are different because we don't just operate within one industry. Universities are at the hub of the city-region agenda. So universities are important players in their local and regional economies, and the links that we as academics generate across Europe and the wider world are fundamentally important for local communities and their economies. Now, as an academic, I put my hand up and say that in the lead up to the Brexit vote, we all stand collectively guilty of not engaging enough with the public. The debate in the UK was allowed to degenerate to such an extent that a populist politician, Michael Gove, could stand in front of a camera and say, we've had enough of experts. Now, I don't know if it's time for amateurs to start offering their opinions, but that is a very disturbing phenomenon. And of course, it's not unique to the UK. We have Trump with his tweets and his post-truth politics. So this event, this cathartic event of Brexit, for universities, it's never been more important for them to reassert their status as defenders of a secular space, defenders of Enlightenment traditions which are integral to European cultural values, and actually engaging with the wider communities they find themselves within. Because if they don't, that space then gets filled by people who one could only kindly describe as, far be it from me to say imposters, but of questionable intellectual merits. So we should not shy away from the fact that we are experts. And the European project, I think, stands to gain a lot in terms of being reinvigorated by us engaging in these debates. So the UK has a lot to lose out of this. This is not an equal relationship. The UK is very highly integrated into the world economy. So EU workers, for example, make up over 10% of the UK workforce. And in sectors such as higher education, nursing, doctors, aerospace, automotive, even more so. The Jaguar Land Rover plant in Birmingham actually has bilingual signs in English and Polish because its reliance on Polish migrant workers is that acute to fulfill these skilled tasks. So I've stood up in podiums like this over the last few months with parliamentarians present and said, do not expect migrant workers to be repatriated from the UK. It is not going to happen. You know, despite the UK government's reluctance, seemingly at this point, to guarantee the status of EU workers, in practicality, that cannot change because these sectors would not cope without them. The UK National Health Service relies on European medics and nurses to fulfill essential roles. So they are not going anywhere. The Home Office can write letters to them saying you should prepare to leave, but that's specious at best. So other sectors such as agriculture and construction continue to have shortages. I drive into work in the morning, I see care homes advertising posts. So that labour supply scenario is not favourable to those who would wish to reduce migration inflows. The UK is even more vulnerable in terms of cross-border supply chains, and in terms of our manufacturing sector, we are over-reliant on oil and gas, automotive, aerospace, and pharmaceuticals. Any imposition of non-tariff barriers such as customs checks on a pharmaceutical drug that has to be shipped to Germany within 24 hours to be finished off would be catastrophic for that supply chain. And the English port of Dover is not set up to cope with customs checks being quadrupled or quintupled, which is what some scenarios suggest if the UK is forced to exit the EU customs union. So I've touched on recent changes to UK legislation making the UK less attractive to international students, but I can only reiterate the importance of the UK as a destination for EU students studying outside their home country should not be disregarded in forthcoming Brexit negotiations. And that just reiterates the fact that universities are not just providers of education, they are also key economic players where they find themselves. And for me, if the higher education sector is to be compromised by new barriers being put in the way, we all lose. Now, the UK has a preeminent place in Europe in terms of science and innovation, and has been a strong destination for Spanish would-be academics, for example. If these links were severed, then we all lose. So for me, it's never been more important than ever to impress on EU negotiators, as well as the UK government's professed position, and I'm not quite sure they have a definite position here yet, to keep these links going. So for me and my colleagues, it might be very tempting in some countries in Europe to say, well, let's kick the UK out because they benefit, disproportionately from Horizon 2020 money. But we argue that positive externalities in the form of access to UK higher education expertise benefits Europe as a whole. Nothing spreads so well as knowledge and ideas and innovation. So for me, for us, the key part of any negotiation stance going forward is to preserve this notion of talent mobility. I shy away from using terms such as visas or entry routes. The key issue is, for me, to maintain, for our sector, given its capacity to benefit other parts of the economy, to maintain an open market across a shared European higher education space. I don't necessarily say that has to be exactly identified with the EU, but we have a common European intellectual space, and it would be a great tragedy to put anything in the way of that. So I contributed to a British Council event yesterday. Very clearly emerging out of this was, the desire, on our part at least, for the UK to continue to play its part in mobility schemes such as Erasmus, and Caroline can talk further around these issues. Stop counting international students as migrants and maintain existing funding and fee arrangements for students. I guess what I'm saying here is if I'm promoting the idea of a shared European academic and learning space, that I'm arguing that European students to the UK and vice versa should be continued to be treated as home nationals. If I was a negotiator, that would be my stance. Because we all win from this. So I'm going to stop there. And thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to pass over to Caroline now, who will talk further around student mobility issues. Okay?
Good morning, and it's my great pleasure to be invited to speak this morning. And I wanted to say thank you to Alex for focusing on Brexit. But I think, as the Rector said at the beginning, we need to also think much more widely about the context that we're operating in across Europe, across the world. So I put up there that it's busy times, and I think there is a new landscape being created as we speak, with the French elections, in America with President Trump. The UK is going through a general election very, very shortly, elections in Germany in September, and also Turkey and the situation there. So I think Europe is at the centre of global change. And we need to think a little bit more about how that will affect how we work together. So I think more than ever, we need to be promoting cultural awareness and understanding. So important when we're asking populations to vote, to work together, societies, to have an understanding of international issues. And I think it's not just important for those older, senior leaders, but very important for young people who are forming their opinions and experiences. And one of those key ways is through mobility and through exchange. It's an opportunity to learn about the country, the host country, but also an opportunity to learn about themselves. It's so important when you live in a different country to see how you engage, how you can buy food, how you can talk to people, and you learn so much about yourself. And I also think it's particularly important for the host city, because this internationalization, the welcoming of European international students, changes the landscape of the city, changes the way they think about the world, And this is very important. But back to Brexit. So, universities in the UK, I think, were in shock, and probably still are, because they are globally minded institutions. It was a bit of a wake-up call, and the reaction, really, to this was, just a moment. The reason we're so successful is because of internationalization, because we are welcome to talent wherever it comes from. And it's this that makes higher education, particularly in the UK, so successful with research, with higher education. So there's a little bit there that I've circled that says British universities have a lot to think about. And I think that they're busy thinking, how do we maintain these connections? How do we continue with our research collaborations? And how do we appear even more welcoming to international students and European students? And one of the reactions was a viral campaign called We Are International. And this was set up by the University of Sheffield in the UK, saying, hold on, we're proud to be open. We're proud to be international and culturally diverse. And we welcome everyone from wherever you come from. And there has been postcards, Twitter, videos, and if you have a moment, I suggest you have a look, because they're really interesting, and a lot of them are student-driven as well. And this is part of the reason, really, that universities were slightly taken back by this, because certainly in the UK, 1 in 6 students are from overseas, and that includes 125,000 EU students. More than a quarter of university staff are from outside the UK, from pretty much every country in the world. So universities in the UK are international. It's who they are, it's in their DNA, in their makeup. And actually, this is a very good time to confirm that last Friday, our government agreed to continue the grants and the loans for 2018-19 for EU students in England, Wales, and Scotland. And this also applies for PhDs. So not only will the regime remain the same for 2017-18, but also the year after, and that lasts for the entirety of the course. I think also there has been quite a lot of discussion about Erasmus+, about Horizon 2020, and the European or the EU mechanisms of mobility. And I would just say that mobility happens anyway. I think it's brilliant, and it makes it easier if there are mechanisms, but it happens. And so you can apply directly to universities, you can do postgraduate programs, there are volunteering and studying, the work experience and studying. And there was a piece of research that showed to the UK that actually Erasmus is really only half, or less than half, of the student mobility that happens at the moment. So there are other ways. Erasmus Plus is a fantastic mechanism, but certainly in the UK, there are other ways and means of mobility. But why do students want to study abroad? What is it? What are the benefits for them? And Erasmus Plus, the EC did some research into what it was that was so useful for students and why they benefited. They also broke down the reactions into different parts of Europe. And there you can see different parts of Europe have different priorities. But in general, it was about developing language skills. It was about future employability, and it was about meeting new people. But there's I think it's about 80-page report that does quite a lot of analysis. And so the benefits of mobility to students, if we look at that, there has been quite a few studies on, it's a lovely thing to do, to travel around, meet new people, but what are those benefits? What is the evidence, and can we quantify what students are gaining from this experience? And although a while back now, 2009, the Funding Council of England did a whole cohort piece of research looking at 200,000 students, looking at which students had travelled overseas and which ones had stayed at home. And they found that those mobile students got higher academic attainment, and they also had better job prospects. And indeed, this is backed up by a European report on Erasmus+, and found that lower unemployment rates, even 5 years afterwards, a higher rate of entrepreneurship, and faster career progression. So it's not just about meeting new people, not just about learning languages, but this is making a material impact on these students' lives and jobs. Again, a report in the UK said that these students benefited, mobile students were less likely to be unemployed, higher academic achievement, earn more than their non-mobile peers. But what they found was in those disadvantaged groups, it made a huge difference. So if you had students from disadvantaged backgrounds, those that had taken part in a mobile immobility had a significant difference in those achievements to people who had stayed at home. So it's not just about international mobility, it's also about social mobility. And these are just some very quick findings from the Erasmus report about mobility, the fact it fosters a mobile lifestyle. So you get the bug, you like to travel, you like to work overseas. And you get to meet new people and have deeper relationships with them as well, which is always a benefit. So we looked there at the benefits to individuals, but there are benefits to employers. And a study in Scotland said that 2/3 of employers thought that studying overseas would improve an applicant's job prospects. And 50% of employers thought that those skills that they gained when they were traveling overseas would benefit their industry. We've looked at individuals, looked at employers, but there are huge benefits also to countries. You know, why should countries encourage students to travel overseas? And in fact, it is about national development, and it is about linking into new markets, getting new ideas, but certainly at the British Council and in the UK, we consider it's those long-term links that people make when they travel overseas that are so important. And it's this soft power that we discussed at the beginning. The British Council did a piece of research and found that 1 in 7 world leaders had studied in the UK. And the fact that those leaders really understood us, that they'd had experience in working and studying in the UK, we think is a huge benefit to us in the UK. And in fact, if you included the Commonwealth in that, it was 1 in 4 leaders had studied in the UK. But I think we need to think differently. And certainly Alex talked about the increase in students in Asia, and how there's going to be much more mobile students coming from India, from Indonesia, from China. And I think we need to think of that when we're thinking about a European mobility scheme. We need to have a way of protecting and promoting European values, but we also need to understand that, how do we interact with the rest of the world when that population is growing exponentially. Now, over the last couple of days, we've been talking at the British Council with a group from across Europe, and we focused on higher education and the vision that we wanted to see. We thought rather than talking about mechanisms and talking about what we should keep, what we're happy to let go, we would be very firm in looking at what we wanted the future to look like. And we came up with this statement. And it's about Europe that leads the world in research and higher education. That is open to ideas, open to people. That has a scientifically literate population that understands the benefit of higher education and research. And I looked at that statement, and it made me a bit sad, because I had taken for granted a year ago that actually that's the Europe I lived in. And so I think we need to work really hard to maintain this, but also accept that it may not look the same, and it may not be the same as it has been in the past. But I think that this is a vision that we can all sign up to. So what next for student mobility? I think Erasmus Plus will continue. I think it's clear that we need to articulate the benefits, that we need to be flexible to include other countries, but I think that it will continue. There'll be a continuation of additional mobility activities. Students will apply to go to courses. It will just happen because they're interested. But I think there'll be new mobility opportunities as well, and a greater flexibility with countries outside the EU. And quite optimistically, I think it's an opportunity for innovation. This is a huge disruption, but can we take something really good from this and say, can we refigure what this is going to look like in the future? And there's a saying in the UK, and probably across the world, that necessity is the mother or the father of invention. And I'm optimistic that I think we can adapt. I think if we understand the benefits, if we believe that student mobility is so important to us, we will make it happen. We will find a way. And my call to action really today to you is to help find the way, help make sure that young people have those opportunities, that they understand the benefits, and that they get the chance to travel overseas and work with different people. So thank you very much.
Iniciamos 10 minutos de preguntas, que estamos un poquito fuera de tiempo, lo cual es bueno también porque quiere decir que ha sido todo muy ajustado. Entonces, como siempre en esto de las preguntas hay que pensárselo un poquito, yo lanzo la primera y así van ustedes afilando las plumas, ¿no? Podría pensarse, tienen ahí un micrófono, ¿verdad? Sí. Podría pensarse desde la Europa continental, y después de oír a los dos ponentes, que el Reino Unido, es una pregunta con un poquito de malicia, que el Reino Unido quiere mantener las ventajas de seguir perteneciendo a Europa, pero renunciando a los compromisos, a las obligaciones que supone pertenecer a la Unión Europea. Es decir, que quiere seguir teniendo las ventajas gratis. ¿Qué opinan los ponentes?
This is working, it's okay. If I understand the question, it was about the UK wants to be part of Europe but doesn't want to put commitments into the EU. Okay, how do I reconcile that? I would say very bluntly, this is not an equal relationship. The EU is about 7 times the size of the UK. The UK has commitments which it cannot avoid. So when Jean-Claude Juncker talks about a 60 billion euro divorce settlement, the UK will be paying that if it leaves the EU, because a lot of that money is committed to things such as the European Investment Bank, of which UK universities have been some of the biggest beneficiaries. I don't think the UK government would want to see its international bond market rating go through the floor if it defaulted in any of these commitments. I think the practicality of the situation is that despite what rhetoric you hear from politicians, when negotiations actually take place and hysteria and emotion and misinformation is replaced by the brute economic realities of an international supply chain, and of course the lobbying that I hope takes place from key players in business and industry as well as higher education, that we will see some form of sensible compromise emerge. I'd be loath to say more than that now. I don't think it's a question of the UK government not wanting to commit. I think it's a question of the UK government trying to find a language that can help it out of the difficult situation it finds itself in. And I think it'd be very interesting to see how the politicians talk over this coming election period regarding these issues. I don't know if that's a very convincing answer, but it's hard to say much more than that at this point.
Caroline.
See if I can. Okay. I would just say that the UK university sector is working very hard to promote the need to be within Europe and to be within Erasmus+, Horizon 2020, and making the case for government and helping government by providing some of the data, etc. I don't think it's about being in it for free. I think as Alex said, there may be difficult situations ahead where you can't negotiate. But in the UK, the higher education sector still want to be part of this and are fighting hard to remain part of this. So we just have to wait and see. But please remain our friends, and we certainly want to be connected to you.
Muy bien. Queremos seguir siendo amigos, ¿eh? Sí. ¿Más preguntas? O preguntas así del público. Yo no sé si hay alguna. Seguro que sí. A ver, cuestiones. Por aquí, a la derecha y al fondo después. Si se pueden presentar, se agradece.
Bueno, mi nombre es Edgardo Spivak, soy el director del campus Almagro de la Universidad Camilo José Cela. Bienvenidos a todos a este campus, que es vuestro campus también a partir de hoy, y los que habéis venido antes sigue siendo vuestro campus también, vuestra universidad. La pregunta es, para que la traduzcan, estamos hablando mucho de estudiantes europeos. A mí me gustaría saber qué es lo que ocurre con los estudiantes de Inglaterra sobre el cambio del Brexit y cómo ellos se sienten afectados a través de intercambios internacionales. Un poco la posición de las universidades al respecto y la posición de los estudiantes ingleses en este caso.
UK students are very sad, and they were born European, and they are adamant that the links will continue. I think certainly universities are looking for ways to become even more, to encourage even more mobility. And there has been a big push in the UK to really try and encourage quite reluctant students to go and study overseas and to understand the benefits of why they need to study overseas. And this is continuing and in fact increasing. So Universities UK have a campaign called Go International, which is government funded to encourage students to go and study in Europe, to go and study overseas. And to make it easy for them. So they don't need to worry about how their loans will be transferred or have the financial worries. It's about really just helping them to do it. Because I think in the UK we realise that we have been the host to many students, but we also need to get those benefits as a country by having our students go and experience life in different countries. In regard to European students studying in the UK, universities, again, have been doing as much as they can to say they are welcome and that they're open. And I think the government have confirmed this by saying that 2018-19 entry will be subject to the same loan agreements and grants and equivalent to UK students. So again, this is just saying that people are welcome. So I think we can't be complacent and we need to keep saying that this is important to all our governments and make sure that our students do have those opportunities and those mechanisms to take part in mobility.
Yeah, I mean, I can't add too much more to what Caroline has said there, but I think, you know, for me, it's as much about extolling you to reinforce to your governments the importance of the sector, because there is a fear that in these negotiations, which may focus heavily around legal issues, free trade, customs, that education it may be seen as a lower priority, and we say it most definitely should not be because of the links to all these other sectors that it has. I mean, from personal experience as an Erasmus tutor, nothing was so successful for an outward mobility program as producing one successful student coming back to spread the good news, and universities that I've been involved with have been very keen to do that, I think. So I don't see any evidence of any change in the status of European students being welcome in the UK and vice versa. If anything, this will just push us even harder to reinforce these positive messages.
Muy bien. Más cuestiones, creo que al fondo había una pregunta.
Soy Beatriz Rodríguez, del periódico El Mundo. A mí me gustaría saber cómo se puede tranquilizar a un estudiante de 20 años que quiere estudiar fuera y qué argumentos le podemos dar para que quiera irse a Reino Unido y no sienta incertidumbre.
Students are extremely welcome in the UK. It's a fantastic experience, both in the universities, in the communities, are still always very welcome. And certainly those students in September, again, will be subject to the same regulations as UK students, and also in 2018-19. And what we're doing is working hard to make sure that this continues. But certainly, students now are very, subject to the same in September and also the September after. So I think we've got quite a bit of lead time, but I would say come and study in the UK, meet new friends, come and experience one of the most highly ranked systems in the world, and help us as well to reinforce our European connections. So, very welcome.
Bien, esto de ser bienvenido, yo no sé si tranquiliza mucho, porque suena a veces a bienvenidos, pero a veces yo creo que habrá que aportar certidumbre, ¿no? Porque si no suena a, no sé, a un poco deseos, ¿verdad?, poco concretos, ¿no? Que al final la gente quiere concreción. Se les puede, abundando en la pregunta, ¿no?, se les puede aportar algún dato que les añada seguridad ante el futuro, más allá de ese 2019. Seguro que les reciben con los brazos abiertos, pero no es suficiente.
we can't guarantee at the moment after 2018-19. But I think that gives enough time for those students thinking at this moment, whether they're applying in September or whether they apply the September after. But what we have to do is keep the pressure to make sure that the students can have access to loans to the same fee regime as the UK. But we can't guarantee at this moment past 2018-19. And it may be that there are agreements between UK and Spain, but certainly the evidence is that really nothing has changed. And those universities are promoting the opportunity to study. So no guarantees, but certainly for the next year and a half, students have the same conditions.
Dos cuestiones más, Carolina. Allí había otra pregunta previa. Bueno, pues venga, vamos rapidito. Tenemos 5 minutos, con lo cual, por favor, un esfuerzo de síntesis.
Good morning. Thank you for your talk. My name is Ignacio, and I'm an independent consultant, and I'm finalizing my master's in education as well. So I want to ask you a more specific question about education, and for you as professionals in education, which competences or skills would you encourage us as educators to foster in students going from the continent to Britain?
Okay, there's been quite a lot of research into 21st century skills and the kinds of skills that students need to operate in a global landscape. Communication, of course, is high on that list. Being able to communicate in different languages, but certainly being able to communicate whether it's through person to person or on social media, etc. But one of those areas as well that's very important is in cultural awareness. And again, we've seen and done quite a lot of research into the benefits of students, young people, people in general, workers, having intercultural skills. So I would say that we want to foster in our young people that ability to communicate with the rest of the world, to understand the rest of the world, and also to have a degree of digital literacy, because the world is moving in a technological direction. So with those 3 areas in mind, I think we will have a very strong society.
Can I add to that? I'll give you a very prosaic response. When I was a tutor for Erasmus students, particularly inward-coming Erasmus students from France or Spain, the English student is very reticent to engage with people who they think can't speak their language. So I say, how do you overcome this problem? You find a common language. And for, well, traditionally, boys, it was football. So if you want to meet English students and socialize with them very quickly, you join a football team, or you find something else that you like doing. Because the lecture theatre is not a shared social space. You know, people sit with their phones if they're not paying attention to the lecturer. You know, that's replaced gabbering to each other. Socialisation, you know, to give an example of Caroline's point, is very important. I mean, there's also a role there for the home country in preparing students to go abroad, is to have ambassadors, you know, or alumni students who've already done the experience, because it's those informal social networks, you know, that sort of social and cultural capital, to use the Putnam academic language, is the most important thing. And I think that's the difference between a successful study year abroad and failure for people who are finding it difficult, is, you know, the success of that integration depends upon developing those social networks, and it's about finding common interests. Yeah, unfortunately, you know, I'm a bit of a rarity. I jam through doors and parachute everywhere, but most people have to be kind of encouraged. You have to give them a roadmap of where to go. And so the role of the tutor in the host country is very important in that regard. And, you know.
Wanted to confirm about the fees regime for EU students coming to the UK. It's for applicants in 2018-19, but it is for the duration of their course. So it may be 3 or 4 years long, and it's a guarantee that it will remain at the same level whether or not the UK exits the EU. So we think that that's okay for the moment, but we will be fighting and pushing the debate as much as we can. But it's for the duration of their course, and so that could take us to 2022, depending on the length of that.
Muy brevemente, siempre pasa, se acumulan las preguntas cuando ya no hay tiempo. Carolina...
No quería preguntar, quería justamente aclarar eso.
Eso, gracias. De lo que me alegro, que se haya concretado este aspecto financiero, ¿verdad? Más allá de... por aquí una pregunta. Ya va a dar tiempo muy rápido a 2 preguntas, pero por favor muy breves.
Sí, les agradezco mucho su intervención, la de ambos, en términos tan amables y tan optimistas de futuro. Yo también comparto la visión optimista, tal vez porque no nos quede más remedio, pero apuesto por una ruptura amable. En ese sentido, yo creo que los temas de investigación merecerían un tratamiento aparte, porque conociendo el debate tan fuerte que está habiendo en las universidades inglesas sobre el tema del Brexit, creo que los fondos que se reciben de la Unión Europea para temáticas de investigación son los más potentes, son más fuertes que los relacionados con todos los fondos de movilidad. En cualquier caso, instituciones como las suyas o el conjunto de las universidades van a tener influencia política con el Gobierno para que la ruptura sea en términos amables. Se están produciendo ya puentes con el Gobierno para debatir todas las cuestiones que ustedes nos han planteado y que son las que verdaderamente ahora están en primera plana del debate en Inglaterra. Esa influencia política sería preocupante si no existiese. Apostamos porque la den, pero si nos pueden dar algún dato o algún, en fin, espíritu de optimismo final, se lo agradecería.
Por favor, brevemente.
The UK sector, higher education sector, is lobbying hard through Universities UK. They're also looking at how they can support other sectors, so in the health sector, to reinforce the need for health skills and for higher education skills. But there is a lot of activity going on, and although they acknowledge that there are other sectors that are seemingly to be more important, finance sector, automobile sector, they are working very hard and working to influence ministers of Parliament, but also our peers and our House of Lords. So there's a lot of lobbying going on, and I think I am optimistic that there will be a deal. But I think it's all of us, and we need to say the reasons why this is so important. We need to articulate to the public why research funding is important to them. And it's not just about academics. It's real societal impact, and we need to make sure that we get that point across.
Muy bien. La última pregunta, brillante pregunta, seguro.
Soy Noelia García, del Economista.
Perdóname, porque quería apuntar algo, Alex.
Perdón, gracias. Just to add to Caroline's point, I've used my own centre as a particular example. We are engaging heavily with the business community, both in the region I am located within, in the middle of England, and also chambers of commerce in other European countries that we are building up relationships with to try and have a more common voice, a wider voice that articulates the importance of the higher education sector and the links that we have with Europe. So I think this just reiterates my point that universities, key economic players in this debate, universities don't operate in isolation. It's very important that they build active partnerships with the business sector, community groups, etc. That's what we are doing practically. So for me, the active focus of my centre is just to inform what we call practitioner community, to help them to better articulate views in this debate, essentially. So yes, we talked yesterday at the British Council event of the slogan coalition building. For me, as a political exercise, to put it so bluntly, this for us is essential to have coalition building. The university sector by itself might be seen as elitist. We don't want to be seen as elitist. We want to make it absolutely clear to the public the wider benefits that we bring. Thank you.
Muy bien. ¿La pregunta?
Aunque se tenga esa mirada tan optimista en la situación de las universidades británicas, ¿cabría alguna posibilidad de que algunas universidades abrieran campus en determinados países europeos?
I think universities are thinking seriously about this. And thinking about what their long-term strategy is. And if students won't come to them, can they go and build partnerships where students can come outside of the UK? I think the UK, because we have such a strong offer in higher education, really want to share that and also understand that it is about having international students involved in this process. And so to not have European students or international students or the numbers that we have would be really very sad, and it would not be the higher education offer that we would like to present. So I would say, yes, universities are looking. It's not something new for UK universities. I used to be based in Malaysia, in KL, and there is a huge education presence from UK universities and branch campuses, etc. So it is something that UK universities have experience in, but not necessarily considered Europe because there's never been a real need, and you've had other kinds of partnerships and joint programs. So I think that will continue, and I think UK universities are looking for other options, different models, that kind of thing.
Muy bien, pues terminamos con medidas también concretas. Agradezco muy sinceramente a Caroline y a Alex su presencia, su apuesta optimista por el futuro. Quiero agradecer también a la Universidad Camilo José Cela, Samuel, su rector. Muchísimas gracias por darnos la oportunidad de profundizar en estas cuestiones. Yo también soy optimista, quizá no solo por obligación, como decía Isabel, porque no nos queda más remedio, sino porque creo que hay que traducir el momento actual a una nueva relación de socios, seguir siendo socios, no pasar a ser competidores. Eso no va a ser ganar-ganar, sino que tenemos que seguir siendo socios con unas nuevas reglas, lamentablemente unas nuevas reglas, pero hay que ser imaginativos y creativos. Es bueno para ambas partes, con lo cual soy optimista ante el futuro, sin duda. Les emplazo al próximo desayuno Universidad Camilo José Cela, que será en el próximo mes de mayo, el mes que viene. Anunciaremos la fecha pertinentemente, y el tema: claves del éxito en los sistemas educativos asiáticos, dentro de esta serie de desayunos en el que vamos a observar la educación desde el mundo, y vamos un poco a descatetizarnos aquí en España, ¿no? Vamos a mirar fuera. Bueno, pues les emplazo para ese próximo desayuno. Muchísimas gracias.